Number 10. Stabbed to death. Maya Ilef Chung was living her best life. At only 21 years old, the British girl was touring the world with a group of like-minded backpackers. It was the ultimate adventure for a girl in her 20s, but while staying at a hotel in Australia, the dream turned into a nightmare when a French man walked through the doors and stabbed Maya to death in a heartless, cruel, and completely unprovoked attack. Before her life was cut short, Maya had traveled to exotic destinations like Indonesia, Turkey, Morocco, and India. Yet despite traveling to places that some might consider unsafe, it was in Australia, in a hostel filled with young adventurers, where Maya met her end. Of course, it was not Maya's fault. It was Smail Ayad's fault, the 29-year-old French national who went berserk at the backpackers' hostel in Home Hill, Queensland. Nobody knows exactly what happened with this guy, but the local police did say he was smoking marijuana before the incident. Then during the attack, he was singing the national anthem of France. He also shouted Allahu Akbar at one point, though there's nothing to suggest a terrorist attack. In this case, people close to the incident believe Ayad was obsessed with Maya. He was also jealous that she didn't like him back. So, in a fit of rage, he walked into the room where Maya was laying in her bunk, grabbed her by the hair, and stabbed her to death. He also went outside and chased the hostel's dog, stabbing it to death as well before the police arrived and subdued him. Number 9. Hostel Cannibal. Hostel owner Mandy Miles was shocked when one of her guests turned out to be a cannibal. Mandy couldn't believe her eyes when she witnessed Matthew Williams, a 34-year-old guy who looked completely ordinary, leaning over the woman whom he had just tried to eat. The victim was 22-year-old Saris Yem, and she was lying in a pool of her own blood when Mary walked in on the ghoulish scene. According to her statement, she was shocked and frightened and didn't know what to do. Matthew kept his head down, didn't look at her, and almost seemed as if he was waiting for her to leave. She managed to mutter, "Do you know what you're doing to that girl?" And he replied, "That's no girl." At this point, it was pretty obvious William was a lunatic. Mandy closed the door and then held the knob tightly so he couldn't escape. She quickly phoned the police and waited for them to arrive. A single female officer was the first to arrive on the scene. She needed to zap Williams with a taser to subdue him, but somehow, the shot from the taser actually killed him. But just what in the world happened that caused all this bloodshed? And in a small Welsh town, no less. There is still no answer. According to The Guardian, the hostel was being used to house single homeless men. There have also been claims that Williams was a paranoid schizophrenic. Number 8. Grenade at Migrant Hostel. At a migrant asylum hostel in Germany, a grenade was thrown through the window. Amazingly, the grenade didn't explode. According to the report from the BBC, the incident happened during the night in the small town of Villingen-Schwenningen. Somebody pulled the pin out of the grenade, tossed it into a hostel housing 170 immigrants, and then walked away. Much to this person's disappointment, the grenade didn't go off. Nobody was killed, and quite frankly, that's a miracle. It is extremely rare for a grenade to simply not detonate. It almost defies all logic. Everybody was evacuated from the hostel, and bomb disposal experts were called in to deal with the situation. They did a controlled explosion to dispose of the grenade, but perhaps the most disturbing of all is that the perpetrator was never caught. Whoever did it was sneaky enough to throw the grenade under the cover of darkness and keep on walking. Number 7. The Childers Palace Fire. On June 23, 2000, a horrible fire killed 15 backpackers at the Childers Palace Backpackers Hostel in Australia. 9 women and 6 men were completely burned alive. The incident started just before 12:30 in the morning. It was in the downstairs recreation room, where a man named Robert Paul Long purposely lit a fire that spread up the walls into the stairwell, quickly engulfing the entire building. Since it was in the middle of the night, most of the travelers were sleeping. Smoke filled the building, it lost power, and most of the victims simply never woke up. As tragic as this was, they didn't experience any pain. They were knocked unconscious by the toxic fumes and then burned to death. At the time of the disaster, 88 people were staying in the building. 70 of them survived the fire, with 10 people suffering minor burns and other injuries. Most of the injuries were from people jumping out of the windows onto the neighboring buildings in a desperate bid to escape. 7 of the fatalities were British, 3 were local. There was also an Irish tourist, a Japanese tourist, and a South Korean tourist who died in the fire. In the case of Robert Paul Long, he had recently been evicted from the hostel because he wasn't paying his rent. He was also known to hate backpackers. Oh yeah, and before leaving, he had threatened to burn down the hostel. This time, the threat came true. After the incident, robber was sentenced to life in prison. Number 6. Paramedic punched in the face. Yet another bizarre attack happened at an Australian hostel, and yet again with a tourist from France. This time, the French tourist brutally attacked paramedics who were responding to an incident at a hostel in Queensland. The paramedics were called very early in the morning, at about 3:40 a.m. They had received reports that a man was feeling unwell and needed medical assistance, but when the paramedics arrived, they were forced to call for police backup and to hide in their vehicles because an agitated French man was trying to beat them all up. When the paramedics rolled up to the building, the French tourist punched a female paramedic right in her face, reaching his fist through her window. He then opened the door of the ambulance, dragged her out of the vehicle, and kept punching her. Another paramedic ran to her rescue, pushing the French man out of the way, and got her back into the safety of the ambulance. Police arrived shortly after and arrested the lunatic, who apparently had some kind of mental issue. Last we heard, he was being charged for assaulting a public officer. Would you ever stay at a hostel in Australia after hearing some of these stories? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 5. Robbed in Colombia. Tourists in Bogota were having a pretty rough time before the pandemic. In the historical La Candelaria district of Bogota, the capital city of Colombia, armed men were walking into hostels, robbing tourists, and sometimes even assaulting people. Hostel owners admitted that in just 8 months, there were at least 7 occasions of armed individuals storming hostels and robbing the people who thought they were taking an exotic South American vacation. In one case, an American tourist was sexually assaulted at gunpoint. To make matters even worse, none of these robberies seem to have been investigated by the police. Foreigners who were the victims of assaults and robberies took to social media to complain about the lack of enthusiasm by police officers to investigate the crime scenes. In the incident of the American tourist being assaulted at gunpoint, she said that the police simply drove her to the international airport and then stuck her on a plane out of the country. Number 4. Dead in a suitcase. At a hostel in West London, a woman was discovered in a rather unusual place. She was found dead and crammed into a suitcase. Her name was Joanna Baruka, a 41-year-old national from Poland. Her body was uncovered at the Pay and Sleep hostel at around 3 p.m. on Friday, December 18th. But what's really crazy is that the last time she was seen alive was nearly a month before, on November 20th. And in addition to the ghoulish discovery of her corpse, her boyfriend from the month prior had gone missing and has yet to be found. It's not clear exactly how long the suitcase was at the hostel. It was discovered by a painter who noticed a foul stench coming out of the mysterious piece of luggage. According to the hostel residents, the woman had been living on the top floor for quite some time, until a Polish guy told her at the hostel that she had gone out and probably wouldn't be back. At the same time, her boyfriend went missing too. The case heated up in January when police launched an international manhunt for the man they believe murdered the unfortunate girl. They say he's a Lithuanian named Petras Salinas, and he could be hiding in Germany. All these months later, though, they still haven't found him, and no official motive for the murder has been given. Number 3. Nightly kidnapping. A British backpacker traveling around Australia was kidnapped by another person staying at her hostel. The girl's name is Maria Kate Hayes, only 20 years old at the time. The kidnapping went down when she was woken up at about 4:30 in the morning by a Swedish backpacker who she claimed was in a manic state. He was completely nuts, pretty much begging her to go on a road trip. Even though he looked out of his mind, Maria agreed to go with him. They were supposed to travel from Mooloolaba, which is located on the Sunshine Coast, to the small town of Gympie, near Brisbane. But things got heated once the journey was underway. The man refused to let Mary out of the car. He was clearly disturbed, ranting about aliens and trying to convince Mary that he himself was an alien. She couldn't believe what was happening, especially since he had been totally normal just the day before. Fearing for her life, Mary managed to secretly text her father on the other side of the world, sending him her live location and asking that he phone the police in Australia. She even gave him the exact description of the car they were driving. Luckily, the police intervened before anything crazy could happen. The man was taken away and likely sent to a mental hospital. As for Mary, she kept on with her travels, though she was a little more careful about who she got into the car with. Number 2. Death in Cambodia. There was an absolutely bizarre death at a hostel in Cambodia that doesn't even seem real. The victim was a girl named Natalie Seymour from Bedfordshire in the United Kingdom. She was only 22 years old, backpacking across Southeast Asia. It could have been the time of her life, but instead, she was discovered dead in her hostel before her trip was even half over. She was staying with her Canadian friend in the touristic Cambodian city of Kampot, but rather than being murdered by some kind of lunatic, she was killed by taking the wrong medicine. According to the in-depth report by the BBC, Natalie had purchased an unknown drug to treat a severe spout of diarrhea. At the place where the girl was staying, there was no nearby medical facility. The only hope Natalie had to get better was to take the strange medicine that she purchased at a random pharmacy. Hours after taking the medicine, Natalie felt terribly ill. She texted her mother in the United Kingdom and explained she was very sick. She had stomach cramps and chest pain because she was puking so much. A local Cambodian took Natalie to a doctor, but the girl was unconscious by the time they arrived, so she was simply sent back to the hostel. Hours later, staff found her dead in her room. After an autopsy, it was revealed that Natalie died from liver damage. Her liver had probably been destroyed by whatever medicine she was taking, ending what should have been a long and promising life. And number 1, snuck into bed. At a hostel in Miami Beach, the unthinkable happened. A woman was on vacation with her boyfriend. For the nightly outing, they chose to go to a bar on Miami Beach and do a little partying. But at around 1:30 in the morning, she left the club by herself and returned to the hostel to go to sleep. It's not clear exactly why her boyfriend remained at the club, but he just didn't go back with her. After all, he probably assumed she would be safe since they were paying for a private room inside the hostel facility. When the unnamed woman got back to the hostel, it turned out to be anything but safe. Because her boyfriend didn't have a key to get back in, she left the door to her room ajar. After lying down on her bed, a total stranger ended up strolling into her room and climbing into bed with her. This was the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. The stranger turned out to be Joel Patrick Bush, a crazy person from Alabama. The 61-year-old vagrant then proceeded to assault the girl right there in the hostel. Luckily, things didn't get too far. The girl yelled loudly enough to draw attention and scare the guy out of the room. The police were quick to arrive and arrest him, charging him with 1 count of sexual battery. However, it never was revealed what the lunatic was even doing in Florida or how he managed to get into the secure building.
10. Robbery prevention fail. In Illinois, several people were taken into custody by the Major Crimes Task Force following a fatal armed robbery. These people got in trouble not only for the armed robbery, but also for shooting Christopher Lloyd, the 45-year-old man who tried to stop the robbery from happening. Here's how all this craziness went down. Christopher was in the Boost Mobile store at the Pace Center Plaza with his girlfriend. It was a Tuesday afternoon and they were looking at new phones. That was when 2 armed robbers walked in and forced everyone inside to go to the back of the store. The robbers then demanded that the clerk open the safe. He obliged, and as the clerk struggled to open the lock, Christopher went after the gun of the robber nearest to him. He must have been watching too many action movies, because he thought he could pull the gun out of the criminal's hands. It didn't go the way he hoped, though. During the struggle, he wound up taking a bullet. When the robbers had finished with their robbing, they took off as quickly as they could. Paramedics came to take Christopher to the hospital, but the brave hero died shortly after arrival. One of the robbers was caught right away, and the second one was tracked down by the Major Crimes Task Force the day after. Christopher's death shocked the community, and most of all his girlfriend, who watched the whole thing unfold. What makes it so tragic is that he died trying to be brave and sticking up for a cell phone store, when in reality, the robbers may have just let them all go once they got their money. 9. The Dog Savior. A man has died following a brave rescue attempt to save 3 dogs from a frozen California lake. The victim in this situation is David Schmidt, who plunged into the icy waters on Thanksgiving to save his beloved animals. It all started when David was taking his 3 dogs out for a walk. He was walking them near Myers, close to South Lake Tahoe. According to the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, 2 of the dogs belonged to David, and the third was the pet of one of his friends. As he moved along the shores of Lake Barron, one of the dogs ran onto the thin ice of the lake and fell through. The other dogs, not quite knowing what was happening, also ran after the first and plunged into the lake. David, not about to let his dogs drown right in front of him, jumped in to save the day. Sadly for David, by the time the officers arrived, responding to a report of a possible drowning, he was dead. He drowned trying to save his dogs. And all for nothing. The cops found 2 of the dogs still in the water, still alive and paddling. All 3 dogs ended up being recovered safely and taken to the local vet. Dogs are pretty resilient, even in frozen water. If David had just waited and called for help, he would still be alive, and so would his dogs. 8. Civil retribution. Sometimes being a Good Samaritan doesn't turn out the way it should. For Good Samaritan Kirsty Jayan, trying to be a good person got her labeled a murderer. Technically, she did kill somebody. She shot and killed Justin Holland, 25 years old, back in February of 2017. But she did it to save the life of a conservation officer who had been responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle. Kirsty Jayan had simply been in the right place at the right time to witness Justin Holland overpower the officer. The officer had been trying to put handcuffs on Holland when things got physical. Watching from the sidelines, it looked as though Holland was about to get a hold of the officer's weapon. That was when she pulled out her own gun, shot him once in the shoulder, and brought the situation under control. When questioned by the police, Kirsty said she was in fear of the officer's life and that she did what she believed was necessary to save him. Regardless of what you think about guns, it does take some serious bravery to step into a situation like this and pull the trigger. Plus, she shot him in the shoulder. She was not trying to blow his brains out or something. But despite what happened, Holland's family is now suing both Kirsty and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources for unjustified deadly force. So far, being a Good Samaritan has cost Kirsty roughly $25,000 in legal fees. 7. Sued at Starbucks. A Good Samaritan is facing a lawsuit after injuring a robber. In July, Ryan Flores walked into a Starbucks with a gun drawn and tried to rob the place. 58-year-old Craig Jerry stepped up to stop the robbery as it was happening. He pried the weapon out of the assailant's hands, and the 2 men got into a brutal fight. Both of them were hurt, but the robber ended up being stabbed by the Good Samaritan. While Ryan Flores is facing jail time for what he did, his family is busy suing the guy who stopped him from committing the robbery. Here's what happened with the fighting. Ryan was wearing a Transformers mask. He pulled a gun and a knife and demanded the barista at the counter give him money. Then Craig Jerry came up from behind and slapped him with a chair. A struggle ensued. Jerry got stabbed in the neck, but he managed to get the knife away from Ryan. Once he had the knife in his own hands, adrenaline took over and he stabbed the robber several times. In total, 17 times. Chief of Police Jerry Dyer has called Craig a hero, but the family of Ryan say he's a menace. They claim that he used excessive force when trying to stop the robbery. Craig is now facing huge lawyer bills to fight off the lawsuit, even though he's not facing any criminal charges. Who do you think is in the wrong here? Do you think a Good Samaritan should be sued for trying to prevent a robbery and defending himself after getting stabbed in the neck? Or do you think Greg should have just let the robber get away with it? Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. 6. Swimming issues. In the Ruedi Reservoir near Basalt in Pitkin County, 2 men drowned to death. It happened after one of the men jumped into the water to save the other, as he was having a bit of trouble swimming back to safety. 2 boats had been tied together in the middle of the reservoir. One of the men jumped off his boat and started swimming away. After a minute, it became obvious he wasn't a very good swimmer. He was flailing, having difficulty and bobbing up and down. The second man from the other boat saw what was happening and rushed in to save the day. He jumped into the water, swam over to the guy who was having problems, and tried to bring him back. But by the time he reached him, he had already fallen underneath the surface. The second man went underneath the surface to try to get him, but sadly, neither of them ever appeared again. The bodies never even floated to the surface. When the Basalt Fire Department showed up to the scene, they had to use a fish finder to see where the two bodies had ended up. They discovered them about 30 feet, 9 meters below the surface. From that point, it turned from a rescue to a recovery. The moral of the story here is that if you see someone drowning, make sure you know how to swim before you try to save them. 5. Animal rescue. In the small village of Molpur in India, a very brave and courageous man tried to save the life of a pigeon. I mean, really, who's to say a pigeon is less important than a dog? In this case, the brave, albeit stubborn individual was desperate to free a pigeon that had gotten tangled in some power lines and was under threat of electrocution. It happened at the local market, with spectators watching as the pigeon struggled helplessly in pain. Our hero launched into action. He wasn't completely stupid, meaning he wasn't going to climb up and touch the lines himself. He found an iron rod and tied a short wooden stick to it. Then he climbed the light pole and tried to disengage the pigeon using his makeshift tool. It didn't work. The second his stick touched the live wire, thousands of volts of intense electricity flowed into his body. He was horribly electrocuted, which caused him to fall off the electric pole and hit his head on the ground. He fell like a sack of potatoes, dead even before he hit the ground. Perhaps the worst part of this whole situation is that the man left behind his wife and children, and all to save a pigeon. 4. Too good of a prank. One ridiculously brave man looked incredibly stupid after rushing to save somebody he thought was about to fall off a roof. As it turned out, the 65-year-old veteran, for all his bravery, couldn't tell the difference between a real person and a stuffed dummy that had been placed on the roof as a funny Christmas decoration. Alfred Norwood Jr. was driving with his wife through Austin, Texas. It was just before sunrise, and they were on their way to work. That was when Alfred saw a man tangled in Christmas lights, hanging on for dear life to the gutters of a house. It looked like the man was in distress, so Alfred pulled the car over to do something about it. He went and grabbed a ladder, dragged it over to where the man was hanging, and tried to save his life. It wasn't until he started climbing the ladder that he realized something was very wrong. His act of heroism was all for nothing. It wasn't a real person. He was trying to save a dummy. All of this may have been forgotten if not for the home surveillance system of the homeowners. They caught the whole thing on camera. It struck them as so hilarious that they have since put up a warning sign outside their house, telling people not to call the police or to try and save their Christmas decorations. 3. Charge for being a Good Samaritan. Yet another Good Samaritan has gotten into some trouble for trying to stop a crime. This time it happened in Wisconsin, when a man tried to prevent a robbery by attacking the suspect with a taser. According to USA Today, Jeff Steele was hanging out at his local bar at around 2 o'clock in the morning on a Monday when a woman came in with a mask, pointed a gun at the bartender, and demanded all the cash in the register. As the robber was busy with the bartender, Jeff came up behind her and tried to shock her with a taser. However, he didn't actually use it. The woman saw what he was trying to do, got scared, and took off before she even got any of the money. She was arrested just minutes later, and so was Jeff. According to the cops, he was charged with the possession of an electronic weapon. This is because he didn't have a permit to carry the taser. You're allowed to have these kinds of things in your home and on your private property, but you're not allowed to carry them in public. Who knew? Even though Jeff clearly lives in a rough neighborhood and needs it for self-defense, he still got charged with a crime. 2. A failed rescue. Colombian model Maria Fernanda Aguilar drowned while swimming at the beach. Her boyfriend almost drowned with her, but was able to survive the terrifying ordeal. According to eyewitnesses, the pair had swum way too far out into the sea off the coast of Colombia. People on the beach could hear them both screaming for help as they realized they were stuck too far from the shore. One of their friends attempted to save them, but couldn't make it out that far. So he quickly swam back to the beach and beseeched the lifeguard for help. But while this guy was brave, the lifeguard was totally useless. He said it was too dangerous to go out and try to save them. Apparently, the lifeguard had no fuel for his jet ski and didn't have enough life vests. The lifeguard literally refused to get into the water to save Maria and Julian. They had to wait nearly 2 hours for proper search and rescue teams to arrive. And by the time the search and rescue workers pulled the 20-year-old girl and her boyfriend out of the water, it was too late. Maria died at the hospital, while Julian made a full recovery. How many of you think this lifeguard should be fired? 1. Disaster on London Bridge. Folajimi Olabunmi Adewole was the definition of a hero. He died trying to save the life of a woman who tumbled off the London Bridge and plunged into the River Thames. Folajimi has been described by friends as one of the kindest people in the world. He became a true hero around midnight on April 24th when he and another man heard the scream and saw the woman flip off the bridge and fall into the river below. He immediately handed his cell phone to his friend, told him to make sure that the police were coming, and then he took off his pants and jumped into the water. At the same time, there was another Good Samaritan also swimming towards the woman to save her. Here's where everything fell apart. It was the middle of the night, pitch black, and nobody could really see exactly what was happening. When Folajimi hit the water, he must have become disoriented. He never even reached the woman to help her, and ended up being carried off down the river by himself. The Coast Guard saved the woman and the other brave man who had gone in after her, but they could not find Folajimi's body. It wasn't until around 6 o'clock in the morning the next day that they finally pulled his soaked corpse out of the river.
Number 10. Stabbing your friend. Skylar Neese left her home in West Virginia on July 6, 2012. She never made it back. Skylar snuck out after midnight to meet up with a pair of friends, Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy, all three being just 16 years old. But after she went to meet up with her friends, she went missing. When her parents woke up in the morning, they had no idea where she was. Her mother reached out to her two best friends. Sheila said the three of them had been driving around before Rachel dropped Skylar off at the end of the road near her home. Skylar was supposed to sneak back in. Well, the kids didn't think about the surveillance footage. A camera captured Skylar leaving the building and getting into a car at 12:30 at night. But she was never seen getting dropped back off like her best friend said. Nobody could figure out just what happened to the young girl. That was until Rachel Schoaf had a mental breakdown. She confessed to a lawyer and the police that she and Sheila stabbed Skylar to death for fun and then dumped her body in the woods just over the Pennsylvania state line, 20 miles from their home. When State Police Corporal Ronnie Gaskin asked Rachel why the two killed their friend, she simply said that they didn't like her anymore. Even though they were supposed to be best friends, inseparable all throughout high school, Rachel and Sheila were harboring a dark, secret grudge. That grudge led to murder, with Rachel getting 30 years in prison and Sheila getting life. Number 9. Cyanide coffee. Jessica Wongso was found guilty in the killing of her friend by pouring cyanide into her coffee. Jessica, a permanent resident of Australia but a native of Indonesia, was sentenced to spend 20 years in jail for poisoning Mirna Salihin. The poisoning happened at a fancy cafe in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. Jessica ordered drinks for her and her friend, then dripped cyanide into Myrna's iced coffee. She was even smart enough to place paper showing bags between her and the surveillance cameras, blocking what she was doing. Myrna drank the coffee, collapsed, and was dead before she could even get to a hospital. According to the judges who worked on the case, Jessica's motive was jealousy. That and a bit of revenge. She was upset because Myrna had a happy marriage and had previously convinced Jessica to break up with a boyfriend in Australia. Jessica was also angry because Myrna, who was supposed to be her friend, failed to invite her to her wedding. Naturally, the only thing Jessica could think to do was poison her coffee. Number 8. The Samurai Killer. In Western Australia, Damien Beckerleg has been accused of killing his best friend with a samurai sword during an afternoon of fishing and beer drinking. He's pleaded not guilty to the murder, instead saying it was manslaughter. The thing is that the two men had been friends since they were just 5 years old. At the time of the killing, Damien was 44. That's almost 40 years of friendship cut into pieces by a samurai sword. According to what was said in court, there was an argument. They may have gotten a bit drunk, at which point James punched Damien and beat him up. Damien then drove home, but James followed and burst into his house, still angry about their argument. To defend himself, Damien grabbed an arrow and stabbed it through James's chest. Damien, then consumed in his blood fury, chased his best friend down the street with a samurai sword that he'd grabbed from his house and stabbed James until he was dead. There is absolutely no debate over whether the killing happened. Everybody knows that Damien murdered his friend with a samurai sword. The question in this case is whether self-defense went too far and became murder. Number 7. Lured into the woods. A teenager has gotten a minimum of 16 years in jail for luring his friend into the woods and trying to cut off his head. The sadistic killer Marcel Grzetzitz was only 15 years old at the time. His friend, Robert Buncis, was even younger, only 12. But what could inspire a 15-year-old to try and decapitate someone who was supposed to be his friend? It's not really clear. According to what was said during the trial at Lincoln Crown Court, Marcel stabbed Roberts over 70 times. The wounds to his neck were consistent with an attempted decapitation. The defendant, Marcel, claimed that he took the knife into the woods with him and Roberts, and that Roberts had actually tried to stab him first. He then had to defend himself by trying to saw the boy's head off his torso. This didn't really prove to be the case. Instead, Marcel lured the boy to a wooded area in Boston with the express purpose of cutting off his head. The creepy part is that no proper motive ever came to light. The killing was definitely premeditated, but throughout the trial, nobody could come up with a solid reason why Roberts needed to die, other than Marcel was totally unstable and irrationally angry for no reason. Number 6. Strangulation. An internet selfie has helped convict a woman who strangled her best friend to death in Saskatoon, Canada. The murder goes back to March of 2015, when Cheyenne Rose Antoine posted a selfie on social media with her BFF, Brittany Gargle. 6 hours after the selfie was posted on Facebook, Brittany's body was discovered. She had been strangled to death with a belt, and that very belt was found lying near the teen's body, where it had been ditched on the side of the road. To try to cover her tracks, Cheyenne sent a bunch of messages to the dead girl, saying things like, "Hey, where are you?" and "Hope you got home safe." Cheyenne told the police that they had been out drinking, but that Brittany had gone home with some random dude. It didn't take long for the police to trace the murder weapon back to Cheyenne. After all, in the selfie she posted on Facebook, she was wearing the exact same belt that the police found beside her best friend's body. She literally posed in a photo with the murder weapon right before committing the murder. Why did she do it? It was a drunken argument. She was given 7 years in jail, saying in her statement read by her defense lawyer, "I will never forgive myself." She probably hadn't meant to do any killing, but drunk and riled up, it's just what happened. Do you think 7 years in jail is enough for what Cheyenne did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Sleepover Killer. Corey Johnson has been found guilty of murdering his friend at a birthday party sleepover in Palm Beach Gardens. Corey was 17, a bit too old to be hanging out with a 13-year-old boy that he killed, and Kyle Bancroft, the 15-year-old boy who invited him to the sleepover. According to the police in Palm Beach Gardens, Corey Johnson first stabbed Giovanni Sierra in the throat several times, then turned his attention on Kyle Bancroft's brother, Dane. He stabbed Dane 32 times. He then went after their mother, Elaine Simon. He managed to stab the mom 12 times before running away. Why go to a sleepover with people who are supposed to be his friends, only to go on a mass stabbing rampage? According to Corey's family, He had an unhealthy obsession with dictators like Joseph Stalin and Hitler. He was also a recent adopter of the Muslim faith, obsessing over the Quran. He believed that his friends were making fun of his new faith, that everything they did went against his new beliefs, and that he should kill them like his hero Hitler would have done. He actually read from the Quran on his phone just moments before the killings, allegedly to motivate himself to do it. His lawyers tried to get him off on insanity, but nobody was buying it. He's been charged with 1 murder and 2 attempted murders, and will be sentenced later in 2022. Number 4. Jealous and deadly. Michelle Avila was from San Fernando Valley in California. She grew up with her mother and 3 brothers. She also grew up alongside her best friend, Karen Severson. The pair had been inseparable since they were 8 years old, but when high school came around, they began to grow apart. Karen became jealous of Michelle because she was more popular, more attractive, and had more opportunities with boys. Angry, Karen began to spread rumors saying that she was sleeping around with other girls' boyfriends. This actually managed to get Michelle beat up by a group of girls on one occasion. Their senior year, Michelle dated a guy named Randy for about a month. After they broke up, Karen started dating Randy, and they even moved in together. But Karen was furious because Randy wasn't that interested in her. He still liked Michelle, mostly because she was better looking. This was around the time that Michelle and Karen stopped talking. On October 2nd, 1985, Michelle was discovered dead in a stream in the Big Tujunga Canyon. She had drowned, and somebody had put a log on top of her body to keep her in the water. It would be 3 years before Karen was finally named as the killer. According to what came out at trial, she had lured Michelle out to the stream, yelled at her for sleeping around, and then drowned her. The only reason she got caught was because she had committed the murder with another jealous girl named Laura Doyle, and the pair of them hadn't kept a very tight lid on things. Karen served 23.5 years in jail and was released in December of 2011. Number 3. Millionaire murderer. Millionaire Robert Durst has been found guilty of murdering his best friend. He was just convicted by a jury in Los Angeles. The murder actually happened 20 years ago, with Robert being 78 at the time of his conviction. The only reason he was caught all these years later was thanks to a documentary that came out. The documentary directly connected him to the killing of his best friend, which was also connected to his wife's disappearance in 1982. The woman who was murdered was Susan Berman. She had been a friend and confidant to Robert since the 1960s, but on Christmas Eve 2000, she was discovered murdered execution style, shot in the head with a 9mm handgun. At the time, Robert told the authorities that he was traveling to Los Angeles to visit Berman, only to find her dead on her bedroom floor when he arrived at her house. Obviously, the police were suspicious. They were also suspicious because Robert Durst had been the main suspect in 1982, when his first wife suddenly vanished. But the police never pulled up enough evidence to convict him, and so he got away with that one. And he would have gotten away with this one too, if not for the HBO documentary The Jinx. While the filmmakers were making the show, Robert Durst accidentally gave them evidence against him and twisted up his testimonies. But his biggest mistake was when he went to the bathroom and muttered a damning confession while still live on his microphone. He was arrested in 2015, charged in 2021, and sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Brooklyn stabbing. In Brooklyn, a man was stabbed to death by his best friend just steps from his house. His friend, who happened to be a member of a local gang, was out on bail at the time because of a gun possession case. Horrifyingly, the entire incident was caught on surveillance video. Jose Perez Rivera was filmed in the middle of the street being knifed by Jonathan Hernandez, someone who had been his best friend for years. According to Jose's family members, Jose was always trying to help his friend out by giving him money, giving him food to eat, and even letting him into his home so that he could get warm. The thing is that even though they have been friends for a long time, Jose was on a bit better of a path than his gangland buddy. But on this day, Jonathan lost his mind. Jose was returning home from visiting his son when Jonathan attacked, stabbed him in front of pedestrians and cars as they drove down the street. Jose, despite all he had tried to do for his despondent friend, staggered up the sidewalk to one of his relatives' apartments and then bled to death on the steps. So far as anyone can figure, Jonathan didn't even have a motive. Number 1. Dead for $10,000. A man strangled his childhood best friend for $10,000. The victim is Sarah Stern, who vanished mysteriously in December of 2016. An Uber driver in New Jersey found an abandoned 1994 Oldsmobile while crossing Route 35. The vehicle belonged to Sarah's grandmother, but her body was nowhere to be seen. What started as a missing persons case quickly became a murder investigation. The police questioned her best friend, Liam McAtasney. He said that they had been together in the afternoon for lunch, but that he hadn't seen her after. Police checked surveillance footage and his story was confirmed. However, they were suspicious. About 2 months later, Liam's friend Anthony came forward to the police, saying that Liam had been asking him a lot of bizarre questions, acting paranoid, and repeatedly inquiring if the police had been asking about him. Anthony took this information to the police, and they set up a secret sting in Anthony's car with tiny cameras. These tiny cameras captured Liam bragging to his friend that he had plotted Sarah's murder for 6 months just to steal her money. You see, Liam had known that Sarah had a huge amount of money in his safety deposit box, and he wanted it. Even though they had been friends from childhood, he didn't think twice about convincing her to take out the money, then strangling her to death to steal it. Do you know anyone who's ever murdered their own best friend? If so, let us know about it in the comments. And thanks a lot for watching. Hit subscribe and check out more of the awesome videos from the channel. See you next time. Bye.